Okay, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your coming to this third session of how to manage the time shift. And tonight we're going to get into some detail about the psychological experience of time and the process of extension and compression. So what many of us have noticed, especially over the past 6 months or so, is that there's been a tendency that when we're in activity and something is very powerful or intense psychologically occurring, for example, my situation in this past week where I had to move my mother from one facility to the other, the feeling that we have when we're in the activity, when we're experiencing what is happening, it feels like it's going on forever. There's a feeling of elongation of time and a sense that even though it might be a day or it might be a week or it might be a month, that it feels like years of time have passed. And this is what we've been noticing also in the political situation, because there have been so many events that have taken place in such a short period of time since the inauguration that I think most of us feel like we can't even keep up with it. And so there's this incredible intensification of the psychological experience of time. But the other side of that is that once something is over, it's as if it never happened. There's this feeling that that event or that situation has been completely erased, and we don't even seem to feel like we have a memory of it. And this juxtaposition between that intensification and the feeling that time is dilated in the present, and then that time expands around itself, and so there's this feeling of expansion to the point where memory is altered. That dance between those two experiences is what a lot of us are going through. And what we're going to talk about tonight is the reason for that. What is the purpose of changing the nature of time? So let's say that from the beginning of time until the past 6 months, we were in a particular temporal epoch. And even though it feels like there certainly have been changes historically and psychologically, even through our lifetime, of course, through the period from World War II, let's say, until now, there is something completely similar to those experiences of time that even if we were to go back in time and to live through different experiences, let's say we were in the Revolutionary War, or we were in the War of 1812, or we were here when the Titanic sank, or whatever the event might be, the actual interior psychological experience of time and the way it was being referenced was very similar. There wasn't really that much difference in it. But in the past 6 months, we've gone into a different time zone, if you will, psychologically and, in a sense, in the quantum mechanical level. So that is why, although we are experiencing a lot of discord or disruption, changes in our own lives psychologically, and event structures taking place that appear very randomly produced and can be in some ways very discordant and not necessarily pleasant or easy to assimilate. The reason for that is because we are actually changing gears in the process of how we assimilate time psychologically. And as I understand it, our nervous system, our brain, our entire body is going through a time shift in the experience of how we are processing not only our own life, but all the events that are going on around us. And there's also a change in how we process the events around us. So think about your childhood. This will make it easy to understand. remember when we were, many of us are a similar age, but if you're a younger person, you probably will not remember what I'm going to say now. But there were, you know, there was a famous news reporter on NBC. There was a report called Huntley Brinkley in America. And you'd get on the news, or Walter Cronkite, and the person would sit down and they would read the news events. And it was a scripted situation, and everything went very slowly, and you were able to learn about all the events in a very sequential order. But as a result of the information highway becoming much more rapid, and the experience of social media and the bombardment of so much information from so many different sources, from even print media, has to speed up and catch up. So if you've noticed, there's been so many events that have been chronicled recently in print media. We often, for years, weren't even thinking of print media. And now every time you turn around, there's something in the New York Times, there's something in the Washington Post, there's something going on in the way that we're processing the information. So what is happening is that we have this backdrop of very, very rapid events. And this is due to the compression part. So, for example, again, they thought that North Korea wouldn't get to the point it has with its weaponry for years. And now all of a sudden it's happening in months. And even the intelligence community is not being able to keep up with it. So in the one situation, if you think about your personal life in the very vivid center of your being, right? And you have your whole psychological experience that's going on. And then there's a backdrop around you of this very speeded up experience of events happening, one after the other, to the point where if you don't keep up with the conversation, even for an hour, there's so much. Remember how there used to be a time when there would be breaking news maybe every few days, and now breaking news is happening every hour. And so the entire situation is speeding up around us, and we are trying to assimilate the external environment, but because it's so speedy around us, there's a way in which we can feel that our situation has stopped. There's an entropy there. There's a stuckness that people are reporting. There's a feeling of no movement, of nothing happening, which is kind of like being in the eye of a hurricane. If you've ever had that experience, everything else is going around and there's so much activity and noise and situations happening, but inside your situation, you feel like you're standing still and there's no movement. So this is also part of that psychological experience. So you can feel that your heart, your soul is just kind of hanging, and it's in a kind of suspended animation. In my work, when I talk about time, I talk about a temporal suspension. So you feel like your heart, your mind, your psyche is floating in this field of temporal suspension while everything else is going on in a very fast level. And it can feel attacking or assaultive because there's so much coming at you, you're not being able to process it. So in order to handle that, something inside the heart has to slow right down. So that experience in the heart of slowing down in that way, the words that I'm using for this right now are divine poise. Divine poise. So a posture of a feeling of entering into a state where you're dropping down into the heart and you have to hold that matrix, that experience, that posture, while everything chaotic is taking place around you. So the experience of suspension which we talk about a lot in the whole notion of time, allows one to enter an altered state where you can actually move forward in time and move backwards in time more freely. And the reason that we need to move backwards in time is because a lot of the events, both psychological events, memories, for example, that we have of the past, events that we have listed or chronicled in our mind that we feel are important from our past, in order to bring that information and update it into the present, we have to have a different psychological stance about those events. We have to gain meaning from them. We have to understand the significance of them. It's very difficult to take all of the data all at once. Our minds can't really do that. We can't really run a movie that starts from where we were born. Let's say you were born in Chicago, Illinois, and then you move to, you know, another city, New York, for example, or you were in Hartford or wherever you were. You can't possibly remember every single memory in every single location and every single building. So what our mind does is it selectively chooses memories. But during a time shift period like we're in right now, you actually have to go back into your database from the past and pull up different memories, ones that you perhaps do not remember. We call these non-rehearsed memories, memories that don't come up easily. So one of the ways that I find myself that is very helpful in this is to actually go back into a family photo album that you might have, whether it's online or in person, and look at old photos of yourself and also of your family members. Because what you're going to find is that the memories that will come up now, because of the nature of the time shift, will be different than the ones that you previously remembered. And the reason that this is important is because past memories are encoded with the future. The present is, in a sense, the holding pattern, the temporal suspension experience, that feeling in the heart where everything is very deep and settled. When you reinterpret a past memory and something new emerges from it, and there's a point of significance that is created, it immediately arcs over to the future. And then in the future, your future self, which is existent contemporaneously with you right now, sends some of that coding back to you into the present. So this is what I mean by a loop. So you go back, you're finding new information, new understanding, new insight, new awareness, new pictures, new visual images, new sensations. You're arcing that information up to the future, and the future takes the past information and it works with it in such a way that it's continuously making future. The future is like a manufacturing plant where it's on 24 hours a day. So it never ceases. It's an unceasing quality because the future is infinite. So the future is making more future and more future and more future, and it's taking information from the past, reconceptualizing it, creating a possible future with it, and then sending it back to you in the present. So then in the present, you now have all this information and insight from the past, which can be kind of overwhelming psychologically, especially if you have a different cast on things, a different awareness about it. And then you have the information from the future that is being bounced at you, and you're sitting with all of that information in the present. So think about if you are in a very, very responsible position. For example, you're president, or you're in a high-level leadership position during this time period. This isn't an easy time period for anybody to be a leader. This is why what I've been receiving is that no matter who would have been president now, this would not be an easy time to be president, because you're in this incredibly strong fluctuation of the temporal field. And leadership usually involves careful, slow analysis and deep statistical awareness. But this is not a time period where that's easy, because you have so much past information that is no longer interpretable in the same way. So we saw this during the election period, that all the methodologies that would normally be used to analyze the information that was coming in, the information and analysts were off. Most of them were off. They were not able to assimilate or understand the significance of what they were experiencing. And that's because as that information was changing so rapidly, it was also changing the future. And so the future was becoming different. And because we weren't used to and aren't used to thinking this way and understanding that the future is actually bouncing back information to us, the internal combustion engine of the present seemed like it was very chaotic. We weren't able to really understand what was happening. And we're still going through this now. The only difference is that it's been about 6 months since this experience has turned on fully. And from what I understand, we're not at the highest level or the most intense level of the experience yet. This time shift interval that we're going through now is a 2 or 3 year time jump. And we're only about 6 months into it right now. So we're getting used to the way time is being expressed. And again, one of the things we're getting used to is the intensity of the present, that feeling of being, if you will, attacked, or that things are coming at you from every direction, that there's too much, there's a sense of overwhelm that you can't really take it all in. And then that change in the breathing, in the brain, in the respiratory system, that is allowing us to actually take in the information. So we have to go through this re-assimilation of time. And we're being trained to do that by our own personal experience and also the event structures that are taking place around us. But we have not reached the peak experience yet. There is a critical mass that is building that will create a quantum leap. So about 15 months from now, I would say that we are going to reach that peak. All right? So we're about, this is an estimate obviously, but about 21, 22 months into the cycle, we are going to reach a point where there's going to be a convergence. Convergences take place in the present. What is a convergence? It means that all of the information from your personal story is going to be re-encoded for you. So all the memories, the events, the people, the situations, the locations you lived in, all that information is going to get re-encoded. and then it's going to arc over into the future, and many different possible futures are going to collide with one another in your personal matrix. You can think about them being, let's say there's 100 possible futures, and they're not sitting discretely in little lines of feeling and thinking. They're all colliding with each other like little atoms. They're all colliding in that kind of very fast experience of not exactly integration, but there is a relationship between all those lines of possible futures. So they're going to collide with one another, and they're going to form some possible futures that are the most powerful for you, the most strong for you, the most evolutionary for you. And that information is going to feed itself back into the presence, and there's going to be a convergence between your new relationship to the past and the possible future scenarios that are the most relevant, the most important for you, and they're going to fold back onto themselves into the present. And this will be your time shift. This will be the peak experience, the pinnacle of this 3-year period. And there's going to be many of these. There may be some pause buttons pressed in the middle, though, because we probably can't go through them all at once. But they are going to, this first one takes place in about a 3-year interval. So it'll be interesting to see where we are in 2020. So as this is taking place, the other thing that many people are reporting is that they're walking around feeling as if everything that's happening that is in the present is taking on a very dreamlike quality. I've heard people actually use the word, I was at the hospital the other day because I was spending a lot of time there, and I was on the elevator with somebody, and the woman said to me, "I just don't understand why everything feels so surreal." And I started laughing, and normally when people say things like that in an elevator, they don't expect a response from anybody. They're really just talking to themselves. But I turned to her and I said, "Yes, that's absolutely right. It is surreal." And I said, "Well, why do you think it feels surreal?" And she said, "Well, because one of her relatives obviously was ill, and that's why she was visiting the hospital." And the hospital is actually a really good laboratory for what I'm talking about in this course. That's what I realized when I was there all week. And the reason it's such a good laboratory are many things, but one of them is that you have all these people of every nationality and every race and every background all converging in one building for the purpose of love. That's the only reason they're there. All the people that are working at the hospital, all the people that are visiting the hospital, everyone's there for one purpose, because there's someone that they love who's in trouble in some way, and they're there to support them. So you can see, for spirit, this is a perfect laboratory, because the only reason that we're on planet Earth is to experience that very thing, which is love, and to realize that all of us are in it together to get it. So the reason that love is important is because when we are living our experiences, we often forget that we are loved or that we can love, because trauma, pain, sadness, fear, things happen to us that occlude our experience of love. So we're not able to get it. We're not able to receive it, and our heart shuts down. So over time, we have encoded our past, in a sense, with anti-love, the antimatter of love. it's not that we are not loving people, but we lose our capacity and flexibility to love and to be loved. So what the experience of having someone that you love be ill does, if you're open to it, is it changes something inside of us and makes us realize with gratitude the tremendous importance of our interpersonal relationships, and also our connectivity to people that normally we would not feel any love towards or ever even meet or know. There was another experience that I had at the hospital where this gentleman walked on the elevator, and he was looking in the hospital elevators. This is an old hospital, and all the elevators don't go to all the floors. It's very, very confusing. So he was trying to get to the 5th floor, and the elevator didn't go to the 5th floor. So in the process of us going up and down in the elevator together and realizing that there was no number 5 in the elevator, I asked him, "Why are you here?" And he said, "My brother was in a situation innocently, and somebody took the butt of a gun and hit him in the head. And that's why he was visiting his brother in the hospital." So at that moment, when he told me this story, my experience was that I had a lot of flashbacks, but they weren't flashbacks about me. They were flashbacks about him, his life, his experiences, things that had happened to him, and things that had happened to him in his experience with his brother. And I realized that that was happening to me because, again, we were in this encapsulated moment, this temporal suspension moment, literally in the elevator. And I realized that if I put my attention into his past, which is what I'm talking about now, that my attention, my love, even though I didn't know him, and I will probably never see this man again, but I realized that if I put my attention on his past, that I could help him re-encode the past and enter into a situation like I'm discussing tonight. So that's exactly what I did. And then I dropped him off at the right floor and told him which elevator bank to go to so he could actually see his brother. And I went on with my elevator journey. So this is when people ask me, what can we do now that would make a difference? Because so many people are upset about what is happening politically and socially at the moment. And it seems regressive. It seems anti-progressive. My feeling about this is that the most important thing that we can do is to pick people and situations like I'm describing to you at the hospital, where you can place your clear, radiant, loving attention on people that you might not even know very well, and to bring your attention out to those places, not only to change your vision of things, your feelings, your psychology, but to actually hold a space for somebody else to have a different version of reality. The secret here is that by igniting that change, igniting that spark of love and attention towards another human being or an animal or plant or some living thing, you will create a situation where they will be able to enter into the time shift with you, even though they have not done perhaps, 1,000 hours of meditation or 20,000 hours of meditation, or participated in any other kind of shamanic or yogic program. Because all the hours that we have put in are living in that past bank that I was describing, and they've accumulated interest. They've accumulated something more than themselves. And that information can actually be passed on to others through attention and love. And what I've been hearing is that we should be looking to do that at every possible moment. So we have to come out now of our temporal bubble. And we all live in a temporal bubble because we have our events, our circumstances, our feelings, our family, our story, our language, our country. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that as spiritual people, we're now being asked to come into a different rhythm, a different tempo with our understanding and experience of time and reality itself. So we are being asked to pass the new information, the new encoded information that we have accumulated over this lifetime to others. It's kind of like in the Olympics when they pass the baton and the next runner has to take the baton and run with it. We have to pass as much information as possible in whatever means we can do it. Not everybody's a writer. Not everybody's a public speaker. Not everybody is a performer. So we all perform, though, every day in the context of our own immediate life. And by sharing and reaching out and letting our feeling level enter into a union with others in the way that I'm describing, we are changing the temporal coding, not only for ourselves, but for that other person. And this is what is going to create that critical mass in the time shift. It's being created through love, through the interaction of love. And love is being fed a particular type of database now, so that there will be more people waking up to what we know is true. So if you're saying to yourself, well, it sure doesn't seem that way because everybody's avoiding the situation with the climate and not understanding the rights of other people and not obeying certain ethics in government. You're right, it sure doesn't seem that way. But from what I understand, all of the things that are happening now are not permanent. They're not permanent. They're not the larger trend, because the futures that are building, the majority of them are not the kind of thing that we're seeing right now. So it's like these futures or these particles of the past are kind of going down the drain. They're being cleared or released. So we have to seek out the possible futures where the earth is whole, where people are getting along with one another, where there's a value to collaboration and mutual understanding, and a change in the way that we're competing with each other for resources. We have to change these things so that when we reach the peak of the shift, by the time we reach it, more and more people will have a recognition of that, a realization of that. And there seems to be, in spirit, a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of positivity, a lot of feeling that we're entering a very good time, that we're about to have a major convergence in our understanding and appreciation for each other and for life itself and for why we are here. And the earth as a being is contributing to that understanding. It's giving coding to each and every sentient being here that's saying, take care of me, the earth. Please don't forget about me, the earth. So the earth itself is sending that messaging out. And the earth itself is speeding up time. The earth itself is changing the temporal matrix that we live in on this planet. It's creating a different type of time. And that type of time will have a kind of stillness to it. There will be a quietness to it, a stillness to it, that's similar to when you go back in time, and even in your own life, think about when you were born. Let's say I was born in the 50s, okay? Much quieter time, much quieter. But at the same time, as we are moving now into this particular temporal epoch, that quietness is going to return to us. It has to return to us. We're not going to be living, ultimately, in the kind of frenetic state that most of us find ourselves having to take part in. Everything has to quiet down, because in order for the larger shift to take place, there has to be a spaciousness for that. There has to be room in our heart, in our mind, in our spirit, in our body to take in that spaciousness. So for that spaciousness to occur, we're going to have to reach a point of chaos and really intense, frenetic movement. And then we're going to have to get to a point where we just can't stand it anymore, and we come into a different experience of time and ingest that into our consciousness. And we are going to send that information out about how that end of that frenetic activity is going to take place, because the future complexities of information processing that are needed for the type of future that we would like to see, where technologies are changing, where the oceans are flourishing, where we have handled the air pollution problem, where we have handled the climate change issues. The technological and social and scientific breakthroughs that are needed at the consciousness level that we need cannot take place in a completely frenetic situation. It has to take place in the silence, and that deeper transcendental silence that underlies things and allows realization and creativity to flourish at much more profound and important levels. And that is going to happen because we're going to reach a point in this curve in time, so that when that peaks, there's going to be a shift in how we feel things. And so even though now everything seems very speeded up and in fact incredibly frenetic, it's kind of like running, when you're a child and you twirl around and twirl around and twirl around just for the effect of what it's going to feel like after you stop. That's where we are. We're being twirled around and twirled around until finally, when we stop, we're going to enter that suspension field, and this is going to allow a shift. So we're preparing for that. We're working towards that. So I'm going to leave it there and ask anyone to answer questions or ask questions that they would like to share now.
Go ahead, Janet, you have a question. Oh, this is unmuted.
So you need to unmute, because my friend Ken, who's engineering, needs to be able to hear you. Is there anything that anybody wants to ask or to share?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is Alice. I was thinking about the going to the future and the future interacting with the past, or the present. Hasn't that been happening all along? You know, in our lives already, or is it? I guess I don't understand how. Not totally clear on how that's changing.
Yeah, okay, good question. Remember in the very beginning, I said that normally when we think about the past, the events, the feelings, the situations that have taken place, there's a part of us that already feels like it knows the meaning of what has happened. That's why a lot of gurus tell us that we need to change our experience of our personal story.
Okay.
So what I was trying to say is that what we are being asked to do now is to go back and have a completely different level of insight or understanding about the things that have happened to us. So do I think that we've been doing that all along? No, most of us have not been doing that all along. Because what happens is that we have fixed ideas about the significance of our life events and circumstances. And especially at our age, for many of us who are older, we become even more fixed about them. So when we go back and we revisit the past in this way, and we take a look internally of what information was left out, what we didn't really understand, we're shifting our past. And then that information is arcing over into the future. So no, I don't think we've been doing this, most of us, because a lot of times, even if you've been through a lot of psychotherapy, you know how you go over the same story over and over again with the psychotherapist, and you feel like you've actually freeze-framed your past. This is why mom did this. This is why my dad did this. This is why my brother had that happen. This is why this happened. We have it all figured out. The biggest temporal shift that anybody has is dying, is making a complete life transition. And one of the things that I found is that when people pass over and talk to me from the other side, one of the first things, and I've been having this happen recently because someone I'm close to passed over, is that the first thing they say to you is that my understanding, my fixed beliefs about the past, how I see things, is not very accurate. So for all that psychological work and all that meditation and all that stuff, there's still some distortion in how I'm viewing things. Or let's put it this way, it's a different version of the past. So yeah, I think there's some work to do there. Any other questions?
So Janet, can you hear me?
Yes.
So it sounds like that possibility to look at things differently has been there. We just haven't seen it or haven't been utilizing it. Is that what you're part of what you're saying?
Yes, but I'm also saying that the opportunity and the way that we can do it now is more potent. Because over the past 6 months, a different temporal window has opened up, and it's allowing us to view things differently, to understand things differently. The opportunity is very strong right now, especially for those of us who are a bit more awake. So it's a special time. It's a good window for this. Anything else that anyone wants to share or talk about?
Hi, Janet's Care.
Yeah.
I'm just really happy to hear that this frenetic period.
I'm losing you, Care. You got cut off. If you can't bring up your audio, you might chat. Oh, there you go. Thank you.
Your description of this curve of going from frenetic to a peak and then to a quieter time was very, very consoling to me. So I really just want to thank you for that perspective, and also what you said about what we can do now with our ability to love and to extend that to everything around us. I'm just very happy to hear all of that.
One of the things that I've also encountered recently, Care, too, is this, that, you know, and I'm completely part of this matrix as I discuss it, but I think that a lot of times in the spiritual community, we think of love as a kind of gushy thing, that we have to be always, you know, very peaceful in our interaction, and we have to agree to, you know, to listen to opinions or things that perhaps in our hearts we don't feel are right. So in a sense, we're controlling our reactivity. But one of the things about this time is because time itself is shifting, it's harder to experience the capacity for that control. I've heard this from a lot of people, that, and I see it in myself, just, you know, finding that my temper is up, that I'm losing it with people, that I'm saying things that normally I would just keep to myself. And the reason for that is because the other part of love is confrontive. No, love is not only agreement. Love is not only acceptance. Love is not only an experience that causes us to have a rapport. Sometimes what is loving is confrontive. And I'm not saying to be cruel, but to be honest, to be forthright, to say what is in one's heart. I had a very intense week having to confront a physician that was treating my mother. And it was very difficult because I'm not a physician. And I had my impression, my intuition, my experience of what I felt was going on with my mother. And the physician had a completely different one. So I like to be loving and in agreement. And I would have loved to agree with the physician and not give the physician or anybody else a hard time. But I found myself having to do that in order to advocate for my mother in this situation, because she couldn't do that for herself. So sometimes lovingness involves assertiveness. Now, assertiveness is really different than aggressiveness. But if you're the kind of person that doesn't often assert oneself that much, it can appear aggressive to other people because it's out of character. So because we're in this intensified time shift experience, people are finding that they feel a bit out of control. And one way that they feel out of control is that they have to exhibit love differently. And they have to become more authentic. They have to say what they really feel, what they really mean, what's really in their heart, to stand up for themselves. So this is part of that too. Anything else that anyone wants to share?
Hi, this is Alice again. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
We lost you, no, now. I can't hear what you're saying. If we lost the audio for the person that was trying to talk. So if you can chat into the chat box,
talk.
we'll be able to pick you up.
Oh, hi. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, around the full moon in July, there was several different silence courses going on, or I was aware of one or two, but in the United States, so I could feel like the whole country kind of settled down, which I thought was really good because it seemed like the country really needed that. So it kind of reminds me of what you were saying about that things are going to get more simple or less frenetic or something like that. It was kind of an experience of that for me during that time, right around the full moon in July.
I think that it's hard right now for us to see how all of the change, all of the complexity of information that's going to be needed to embody that change is going to be accompanied by an underlying silence or a slowing down in the valley of the heart. But from what I understand, ultimately on earth, we are not going to be living in the way we are right now. I mean, I think that most of us realize that frenetic kind of it's discontinuous, it's incongruent, this pacing of things, that it can't continue this way because we lose touch with ourselves too much, and that theme of divine poise cannot be there. So we have to move into a much more advanced state of technology that will actually send information, much more information to us and through us, but we will be able to assimilate it differently. And we won't find our kids staying up all night having to listen to video games or watch video games in order to be able to feel that they can keep up. So we're kind of in a beginning window of being able to work with massive amounts of technological information and being able to assimilate that with the heart value and with that level of deeper silence. We're children at it. We're not very good at it yet. We're at the very, very beginning of that. But this first skip in time, this 3-year period we're discussing, is kind of an overture. It's an entry point into learning about that, into finding that capacity. That's what we're after. That's what we want.